Welcome back everybody to another video. A recent study was just done on NFL draft efficiency ratings. This was done by a guest columnist from the Football Outsiders by the name of Benjamin Ellinger, and this study that he conducted found out that the Packers had the second best drafting efficiency for the 2010s. And as you know who this gentleman here is. This is Ted Thompson, the former general manager of the Green Bay Packers. He was the main guy that was the drafter for the Packers during the 2010s decade. And I'd like to go over the article of the findings and the how things came to be that Ted Thompson was in fact actually a really good drafter. And this case study here will show that I believe that is the case. And the first thing that he conducted was draft capital. Right now here we have the chart here in which he has everything outlined from each of the 32 teams to the 2010 to 2019, and then right here he has the 10-year span on average and 5-year span on average for team draft capital. So if we were to go here and let's just take a look at 2010 for example, probably the team with the least amount of draft capital was probably the Chicago Bears for 2010. They have at the formula, which here was 1.16%. Right now here the percentages here are as follow for the table. The higher you are, the more draft capital you have, and if the lower you have, the more at the least amount, the more you're at the bottom. So, and then you have right here shaded in dark. You're probably at the for the less than 100%. You're at the very bottom percentile, and then you have at the lesser percentile shaded in red. If you are shaded in green, you had the most draft capital for that particular season. So when you go down here, the team with the most draft capital in 2010 was the Los Angeles Rams at 4.88. Also, the Los Angeles Rams had the #1 pick in 2010, and they chose Sam Bradford with that pick. So that has a lot to do with the draft capital. I think it was just kind of like where you were selecting in the draft, but that's just an assumption. I haven't really read through all of this entirely. I just wanted to be able to get this out for you to give you what the formula was on his calculations and what he is able to bring up. So the other thing for his formula was draft return. So the return, which would be what they got from the team's draft capital. How did this particular draft pick perform for you, and probably where the player was selected. Like as opposed for draft return, you're probably going to give a little bit of leniency towards late round picks because of just based on bust rate and just where the player was probably going to project it, how he was going to project, as opposed to a first and second round picks who are probably most likely projected to play better than a 7th rounder or a 4th round pick. So the draft return is something to kind of keep notice of. For the Green Bay Packers, they wound up actually coming out here at 5th place at 4.55%, where the best team that came out for draft return was the Pittsburgh Steelers at 5.96. The Pittsburgh Steelers and the Green Bay Packers, I don't think it's a coincidence that the return was so good, and they both went to the Super Bowl that season. So you can come back here and read on draft return and how things were calculated in that regard. But now we're going to go down here and take a look at the main focal point here, which is return versus capital. So when you take all those percentages and you look at them together, that's probably how this is the main focal point on how Benjamin was able to come up with the formula with having the most efficiency out of the 10-year span for the Green Bay Packers. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Here is the 10-year span, the decade here, and right, you see you have Seattle being the most efficient drafting team out of the decade at 135%, and then you have Green Bay and surprisingly the Dallas Cowboys tied for second at 100 I'm sorry for the stuttering. I'm talking a little fast. I need to slow down. At 120%. I think the reason why I was talking so fast is because I was so surprised to see that the Dallas Cowboys were actually tied for second at 120. So from here on out, I'm not going to question what Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones are going to do for drafting because according to efficiency, they are actually really good drafters. So I will no longer be making any Dallas Cowboy Jerry Jones drafting jokes or anything like that because they actually do a pretty good job, and they have done a pretty good job according to this efficiency rating at 120% for the 10-year span. Now for the 5-year span, this is where things are a little bit not so good for the Packers. They go from down from second or tied for second to probably kind of more at the lesser point at 98%. So that kind of goes to show that the drafting for the last 5 years has turned out not so well. But given the fact that some of these players still have yet to prove themselves, so this number could be pushed up in the future. This is just kind of how things are projected as of now. Let's go and check out the percentages for Ted Thompson. Let's just go briefly over the percentages for Ted Thompson starting in 2010 for the Green Bay Packers. So sure enough, at 178%, only trailing the Pittsburgh Steelers. In 2011, the return versus draft capital at 121%. So it's up at it's like I said, it was a pretty good year, I think. 2012, not so much at 90%, and then 2013, which was a very, very good year for the Packers at 206%, and it's the Packers in first by a wide margin. 2014, I think the Packers had a really stellar draft that season, 125%. And then 2015 is where things start to dip down a little bit, unfortunately. And 2015 was not a very great year for the Packers at 94%. 2016, the Packers got quite a bit better in return versus capital at 139%. And then 2017 was a pretty decent one with 113%. 2018, which is not Ted's drafting. This is Brian Gutekunst, and the draft return for Brian Gutekunst right now is at 87%, which is lower than any other year in terms of a return versus capital than a Ted Thompson draft. But 2018 has yet to be set in stone. There's some players that could make some jumps, and that would be Josh Jackson for one, the second-round pick. Warren Burks, our third-round pick. The jury's still out on him. He could still help. And then going to 2019, here are the Packers down here, shockingly at 69%. But of course, 2019 was just only 1 year ago, so some players could still step up and take that number down from 69% and make it higher. So I'm talking about players like Rashawn Gary for one, our first-round pick from last year, our second-round pick. Elgton Jenkins has probably been the best pick so far for the Packers. Elgton Jenkins has been an absolutely stellar guard for us and is projected to be a very good starter and possibly a Pro Bowl guard in the future. So there is plenty of time for unproven guys who have been raw players to be able to prove themselves, and a lot of these guys that Brian has drafted are very much project guys. They are probably projected heavily to be pretty good in the future. That is certainly Rashawn Gary. That's definitely the case for him. So the jury's still out on the 2018 and 2019 columns, in my opinion. It's really too soon to judge a draft class in just 1 or 2 years, as players still can develop and can get better as their careers go on. So I'm not discouraged by the 2018 and 2019 numbers for the Packers. I'm pretty sure things will turn out pretty well for Brian's first two draft classes. If the 2018 class does not go as well as it should have, well, Brian was just a rookie. He's a rookie general manager. I think there is obviously a learning curve in terms of being a general manager, so I don't expect the 2018 class to turn out perfectly, and the 2019 class also probably a learning curve for him. But from here on out, I definitely think that Brian Gutekunst is going to be a very good general manager for us, and I think he continues to learn, and I think he actually might be getting better might be able to be actually get better as a drafter. We just don't know that yet, based on this draft, which was very highly questionable, but some moves were very questionable. But who knows what can happen with these draft choices? They could be look pretty stupid now, but could be genius moves 5 years into the future. People were probably not very high on drafting Aaron Rodgers in 2005, but it was a genius move now because look at Aaron Rodgers. He has turned out to be not only a great Packers quarterback, but the greatest quarterback to ever play the game, for crying out loud. So we have to thank Ted Thompson for that and for the draft classes that he was able to put forth in the beginning of the 2010s decade. But unfortunately, things just did not go as well at the later half of the decade for Ted, and which is why he is no longer the general manager, and it is Brian Gutekunst. So for that, I will leave it here, and I'll catch you guys later for another video. Go Pack Go!